Amid the freezing snowstorm, an 8-year-old boy suddenly stops in his tracks. In front of him lies a heartbreaking sight. A mother dog motionless on the icy ground, surrounded by 8 shivering puppies, crying out for help. He turns to his mother, eyes pleading, but she hesitates. What he doesn't know is that his decision that night won't just save these tiny lives, it will change his own forever, and perhaps mend something that seemed broken beyond repair. But how did a single photo capture the world's attention, and why would the weakest puppy become a hero? Let's uncover this extraordinary story. This story will move you in ways you never imagined. We'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and be part of this journey with us. May this story fill your heart with warmth and hope. Now, let's begin. Ethan sat on the front steps of the apartment building, his small hands gripping the edges of his jacket tightly as he gazed out across the city. The lights of Chicago twinkled in the distance, but the cold wind that swept through the streets was harsh, like a constant reminder of how far his life had fallen from the warmth it once had. He used to love nights like this, cozying up with his parents, the warmth of the family filling their small living room. He would laugh and joke with his dad, and his mum would smile at them both from across the room. That was before everything fell apart. Ethan's world had changed when his parents divorced. It wasn't just the absence of his father in their home, it was the complete silence between him and his mum. They used to talk for hours, share stories, and laugh about anything and everything. Now, it was as though there was a wall between them. His mother's eyes often seemed distant, filled with unspoken words. And Ethan wasn't sure what to say anymore. It felt like nothing he did could bridge the gap that had suddenly appeared between them. The affection they once shared had been replaced by a quiet, empty house, where even the air seemed cold. His father had left, not just their house, but their lives, and Ethan was left wondering what had gone wrong, why everything had changed so suddenly. The last time they spoke, his father had promised to visit, but it had been weeks, and Ethan no longer knew if he should wait or if he had already been forgotten. His mother rarely mentioned his dad anymore, and Ethan had stopped asking. It was as if both of them were trying to hold on to pieces of a life that no longer fit together. But tonight, the silence was different. As they walked through the streets, the evening air biting at their faces, Ethan couldn't help but feel that something was about to happen. He had no idea what it was, but a part of him deep down felt it. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was desperation, but in that moment, walking next to his mother in the crisp winter air, he longed for something to change, something to bring them back together, or at least something that would make the world feel warm again. Ethan's mother walked beside him, her head down, her eyes focused on the ground. She didn't look at him, and Ethan didn't know if it was because she didn't want to, or because she simply didn't know how. He wished he could fix things, but how could he? He was just a child. And she had her own pain, her own struggle. She had stopped being the mother he remembered. "Mum, can we stop at the park?" Ethan asked, his voice tentative. His mother looked up briefly, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "It's too cold, Ethan," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "We need to get home." Ethan nodded silently, though part of him wanted to argue. There was something in him that longed to reconnect with his mother, to feel the warmth they once had. But there was nothing left to say. The words didn't come anymore, not between them. As they turned down a narrow alley, Ethan suddenly stopped in his tracks. He heard something. It was faint at first, like a soft whimper, and then a louder cry. A cry of pain, of distress. It made his heart race. "Mum, do you hear that?" he asked, his voice urgent. His mother turned toward him, confusion on her face. "What are you talking about?" "That sound," Ethan pressed. "It's coming from the alley." His mother hesitated, but then she sighed, looking at him with that tired, distant expression. "Ethan, we don't have time for this. Let's go home." But Ethan had already started walking into the alley. He felt an inexplicable pull, as though something inside him was telling him that he couldn't walk away. Not this time. As he walked deeper into the shadows of the alley, the sound grew louder. It was clear now. There was something out there, something in pain. His heart pounded in his chest as he neared the source. His breath visible in the freezing air, he took careful steps toward the corner of the alley. There, in the dim light, lay a husky mother, her once beautiful white fur matted and stained with dirt and blood. She was barely breathing, her body weak and emaciated, frozen from the cold. Around her, 8 tiny puppies huddled together, their fragile bodies trembling. Their small, helpless cries filled the air as they nuzzled against their mother, seeking warmth. But their mother was no longer able to care for them. She lay motionless in the snow, her body stiff with the cold, her eyes closed. Her breathing was shallow, a faint rasp in the air, but it was clear she was dying. "Mom!" Ethan cried, his voice cracking as he knelt beside the dog. He reached out to touch the husky's fur, feeling the coldness radiating from her body. "She's still alive." His mother approached cautiously, her face pale as she looked at the scene. Her gaze shifted from the dying dog to the puppies, who were now sniffing at their mother, desperately trying to rouse her. "Ethan, we can't do anything for her," she said quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "She's gone. We can't take care of them." But Ethan wasn't listening. His heart broke as he looked at the helpless puppies, their tiny faces filled with confusion and fear. He couldn't leave them like this. He couldn't just walk away and pretend they hadn't seen this. "We have to help them, Mum. We can't just leave them here," Ethan said, his voice shaking with emotion. His mother looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mix of grief and disbelief. For a moment, it seemed like she would refuse. But then she sighed heavily, stepping forward and kneeling beside him. "All right, Ethan," she said softly, her voice strained. "We'll take them with us." Ethan's heart swelled with relief, but there was also an aching sadness deep within him. His mother was right. They didn't have the means to care for them, and the reality of the situation weighed heavily on him. But for now, he couldn't think about that. He could only think about how they couldn't leave the puppies alone, abandoned in the cold. Carefully, Ethan and his mother gathered the puppies into their arms, wrapping them in their coats for warmth. The mother dog's body was too frozen to move, and Ethan knew there was nothing they could do for her now. With a heavy heart, they covered her with snow, a quiet burial under the cold sky. They didn't have the strength to take her with them, but they gave her the only gift they could, a peaceful rest. Together, Ethan and his mother left the alley, carrying the 8 tiny puppies back to their apartment. They didn't know how they were going to care for them. They didn't know what would come next. But one thing was clear. Their lives were about to change forever. As they reached their small apartment, Ethan gently placed the puppies in a box near the heater. His mother quickly set about gathering food and blankets, doing what she could to make them comfortable. Despite her exhaustion and the overwhelming weight of their situation, there was a quiet determination in her movements. Ethan sat beside the puppies, watching as they settled into the warmth of their new shelter. He couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for them. They were so small, so fragile, and yet they had already lost so much. But they were here now, and Ethan wouldn't let them suffer again. He couldn't. As he sat in the dim glow of the apartment, the puppies nestled around him, Ethan knew that their story wasn't over. It had only just begun. And though he didn't yet understand how it would all unfold, one thing was certain. This was the moment his life began to change. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a spark of hope. And in that small, warm apartment, with 8 tiny puppies by his side, he found the strength to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but unwilling to close. The apartment was dimly lit, the only source of warmth coming from the space heater his mother had placed near the small makeshift bed for the puppies. 8 tiny bodies huddled together, their fur still damp from the snow, their fragile forms barely moving. His mother sat nearby, carefully pouring warm milk substitute into a shallow dish. She had managed to find some puppy formula at a nearby convenience store, but neither of them knew if it would be enough. "Here," she said, placing a small dropper in Ethan's hand. "Try to get them to drink a little at a time. They're too weak to eat on their own." Ethan nodded and dipped the tip of the dropper into the milk before bringing it to Tiny, the smallest and frailest of the puppies. His heart clenched as he watched the tiny creature weakly lap at the liquid, his little body trembling. The other puppies were slightly stronger, though not by much. Luna and Bella, 2 of the bigger ones, eagerly suckled at the dropper Ethan held, while Max and Rocky tried to push their way closer, their tiny tails flicking weakly. Snow and Finn barely responded, only managing a few licks before curling up into the warmth of their siblings. But Tiny struggled the most. His little mouth barely moved, and each breath he took was slow and strained. Ethan refused to let himself think the worst. "You have to keep trying," he whispered, gently stroking Tiny's frail body. "You can't give up now." His mother watched in silence, her hands resting on her lap as she observed her son. Something about the way he looked at the puppies, especially Tiny, reminded her of how fiercely he used to hold on to the idea of their family, how he had fought, in his own way, to keep them together long after she and Ethan's father had given up. She swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. "Ethan," she said softly, "why don't you rest for a little bit? I can take over for now." But Ethan shook his head. "I don't want to leave them." She sighed but didn't argue. For the next few hours, the apartment was filled with quiet movements, the soft rustle of blankets, the gentle drips of the dropper, the faint whimpers of the puppies as they settled into their new home. The snowstorm outside continued to rage, rattling the windows, but inside, a different kind of battle was taking place, one between life and the looming shadow of loss. The first loss. As the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, Ethan felt his head droop. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had finally caught up with him. A soft noise startled him awake. He blinked, disoriented, before realizing he had fallen asleep sitting up, his back against the couch. His mother was sitting across from him, her expression unreadable. Then he noticed what she was holding in her hands. Tiny. The puppy was completely still, his little body no longer trembling. Ethan's stomach clenched as his breath hitched. "No." His mother didn't say anything, but her silence said enough. She gently reached out, placing Tiny into Ethan's hands. His fur was still warm, but his tiny chest no longer rose and fell. Ethan stared, his vision blurring with tears. He had tried, he had stayed up all night, he had done everything he could, but it hadn't been enough. A sob broke from his throat before he could stop it, his grip tightening around the lifeless puppy. His mother hesitated, then reached out, wrapping her arms around him. It was the first time in a long time that she had held him like this. Ethan didn't pull away. He buried his face into her shoulder, his small frame shaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking his hair. "I know you tried." They sat like that for a long time, the early morning light casting a soft glow around them. The other puppies slept soundly, unaware that one of their own was now gone. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a deep, aching sorrow, but also something else. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel like he was alone. A conversation that was long overdue. Later that morning, after they had wrapped Tiny in a soft cloth and placed him in a small box, Ethan and his mother sat together at the kitchen table. Neither of them spoke at first. Ethan traced patterns on the wooden surface, his fingers absently following the grain of the wood. His mother sipped from a cup of coffee, her hands wrapped tightly around the mug, as if trying to draw warmth from it. Finally, she broke the silence. "I didn't know how to talk to you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked up. "What?" "After the divorce," she continued, not meeting his gaze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to make things okay for you. And I thought maybe if I just gave you space, if I let things settle, we'd figure it out. But instead I just made you feel alone." Ethan's throat tightened. He wasn't sure what to say. He had spent so much time feeling like his mother didn't care that he had never considered that maybe, just maybe, she had been hurting too. "I miss Dad," he admitted quietly. His mother closed her eyes for a moment before nodding. "I know." Ethan hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on his heart. "Do you think we'll ever be a family again?" She looked at him then, and for the first time in a long time, he saw real emotion in her eyes. "We'll always be a family, Ethan. It just might not look the same as it used to." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the truth. And for the first time, he felt like he could accept that. Finding hope in the smallest things. As the day went on, Ethan and his mother took turns feeding the puppies, making sure they were warm, doing their best to keep them alive. There was a quiet understanding between them now, something fragile but real. The puppies, oblivious to the sorrow that had filled the night before, began to show signs of improvement. Max and Bella had started to play, their tiny tails wagging as they nudged each other. Luna and Rocky curled up together, sleeping peacefully. Shadow, always quiet, simply watched from the corner, his dark fur making him stand out from the rest. Ethan found himself smiling just a little. "We're going to have to find homes for them eventually," his mother said as she carefully stroked Snow's tiny head. Ethan nodded, but deep down he already knew there was one he wasn't going to let go of. Shadow. Something about the little puppy felt different, special, and as he sat there, watching Shadow's small chest rise and fall, Ethan felt something warm settle in his heart. Maybe things would never be the same again, maybe his father wouldn't come back, and maybe their family would always look a little different. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like he had lost everything. For the first time in months his mother was here, really here, and for now that was enough. Will Ethan and his mother be able to save the remaining puppies, or will the harsh winter take more lives before they find a way? The days that followed were filled with cautious hope. The apartment, once silent and cold, now carried the soft sounds of tiny paws shuffling on the blankets, the occasional playful yip, and Ethan's quiet murmurs as he tended to the puppies. Under his and his mother's care, the remaining 7 puppies slowly regained their strength. Max and Bella were the most energetic, constantly trying to wobble onto their feet, their tails wagging despite their frailty. Luna and Snow remained close together, preferring warmth over play. Rocky, ever curious, often tried to venture beyond the blanket nest Ethan had set up, only to be gently nudged back by his siblings. Finn, though small and nervous, had started to eat better, his body less fragile than before. And Shadow, the quietest of them all, watched everything. He was smaller than the others but strangely observant, his deep, intelligent eyes always focused on Ethan. Ethan had barely left their side since that first night. He had stopped playing video games, barely touched his school books, and had forgotten the world outside their apartment. His mother had let him be, silently watching as he poured every ounce of his energy into keeping them alive. And then, one morning, she did something unexpected. She picked up her phone, hesitated for a moment, then knelt down near the puppies. "Hold still," she murmured. Ethan, who had been gently stroking Shadow's fur, glanced up in surprise as the camera clicked. "What are you doing?" he asked. His mother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the screen, adjusting the brightness before snapping another photo, this time of the puppies curled together, their tiny bodies pressed against one another for warmth. They still looked fragile, but there was something else in the image. Hope. She exhaled slowly, almost as if she wasn't sure if she should continue. Then, without another word, she opened her social media app and started typing. A story that needed to be told. Ethan sat beside her, watching as she hesitated over the caption. Finally, she wrote, 7 abandoned puppies left in the freezing cold. Their mother didn't survive, but they're fighting for their lives. If anyone knows a way to help, please reach out. She hit post before Ethan could say anything. He blinked. Mom, why did you do that? She sighed, setting her phone down. Because we can't do this alone, Ethan. Someone out there might be able to help. Ethan frowned. He wasn't sure how he felt about strangers seeing their puppies. This had been something just for him and his mum, something fragile, something that had started to make them feel like a family again. But his mother was right. They couldn't do this alone. Then a thought crept into his mind. What if no one cared? What if no one even saw it? Do you think people will even notice? He asked hesitantly. His mother glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I don't know, she admitted, but we'll find out soon enough. The power of a single photo. At first, nothing happened. The post sat there unnoticed, buried beneath holiday photos, political debates, and random internet jokes. But then it started. A single comment, then another, and another. People started sharing the post, tagging friends who worked in animal rescue, offering advice on how to properly care for newborn puppies. Some offered donations, others asked if the puppies needed medical attention. Ethan's mother looked at her phone in disbelief as the notifications exploded. Within a few hours, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. By the next morning, the story had reached local news stations. Reporters started messaging her, asking for details. Animal welfare groups reached out, offering medical care, supplies, and even potential homes. Ethan sat beside his mother as she scrolled through the overwhelming flood of messages. He had never seen her this engaged in something before, not since the divorce. It was strange. She cared, not just about the puppies, but about something, anything at all. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan saw a spark of the mother he used to know. He hesitated before asking, Do you think Dad will see it? His mother looked up sharply. She hadn't considered that. I don't know, she said after a moment. Would you want him to? Ethan didn't answer right away. Would his dad even care? Or was he too far gone from their lives to notice? More than just a viral story. A few days later, the doorbell rang. Ethan ran to the door, his heart pounding. His mother had told him that a journalist might stop by, but he hadn't expected them to come so soon. When he opened the door, a woman in a thick winter coat smiled warmly at him. Hi there, she said. You must be Ethan. I'm Sarah Reynolds. I work for Chicago News Daily. Your mum invited me over to talk about the puppies. Ethan nodded slowly, stepping aside to let her in. His mother greeted Sarah, looking more nervous than she had in days. We weren't expecting this much attention, she admitted. Sarah smiled kindly. Stories like these matter. People care more than you think. As they sat down, Sarah pulled out a notepad. Can you tell me how you found them? Ethan swallowed, glancing at his mother before speaking. It was really cold that night, he began. I heard them crying in an alley. Their mum, she didn't make it. Sarah nodded, her eyes softening. And you decided to take them home? Ethan glanced down at Shadow, who was curled up beside him, his tiny body tucked into the warmth of Ethan's hoodie. I couldn't just leave them, he said simply. Sarah smiled. That's really brave, Ethan. His mother exhaled quietly. We just wanted to do the right thing, she said. Sarah took a few more notes before tucking her notepad away. One last question, she said, looking between them. What do you hope happens next? Ethan's mother hesitated. Ethan, however, didn't. I just want them to be safe, he said, stroking Shadow's small head. And I want people to know that they mattered. Sarah's expression softened as she nodded. A shift in perspective. That night, after the journalist left, Ethan's mother sat on the couch, scrolling through the news article that had already been published. The headline read, Boy and his mother rescue 7 puppies from the cold, a story of compassion and hope. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. This is a lot, she murmured. Ethan sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. He wasn't sure how to feel. It was strange, having the world suddenly care about something that had, for a moment, felt like just theirs. But then he glanced at the puppies. They were all sleeping, their tiny bodies nestled against each other, unaware that their story had reached thousands of people. And then he glanced at his mother. She wasn't distant anymore. She wasn't lost in her own world. She was here. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't pulling away. Instead, she was sitting beside him, present in this moment. Maybe this wasn't just about the puppies. Maybe somehow they had saved something too. And as Ethan watched Shadow stir in his sleep, he realized something. Their story was just beginning. For the past few days, Ethan had been adjusting to the strange reality of his life becoming public. The flood of messages and comments still overwhelmed him. People from all over were invested in his story, sending kind words, offers to help, and even gifts for the puppies. But Ethan barely paid attention to the internet anymore. His world had shrunk down to this apartment, these 7 puppies, and the quiet warmth that had slowly begun to return between him and his mother. He didn't expect another surprise, certainly not the phone call that changed everything. A familiar voice from the past. Ethan was sitting on the floor, gently rubbing Shadow's small head as the puppy drifted in and out of sleep. The others were curled up in their nest of blankets, their tiny bodies rising and falling with steady breaths. The apartment was quiet, until his mother's phone rang. She was washing dishes, and at first she didn't seem to hear it. Ethan glanced over at the screen on the counter. Then his heart stopped. Dad. His stomach twisted. He hadn't seen that name appear on his mother's phone in months. For a second, he wondered if she would ignore it. But then, with a deep breath, she dried her hands and picked up the call. Hello? Ethan couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but his mother's face shifted. First surprise, then something unreadable. After a moment, she turned toward Ethan, her eyes soft. It's your dad, she said quietly. Ethan tensed. He hadn't spoken to his father in so long, not since he left. What did he want now? His mother hesitated, then held out the phone. He wants to talk to you. Ethan froze. He wanted to talk to his dad. He also wanted to hang up and pretend he didn't care. His hands clenched into fists on his lap. After a long moment, he took the phone. Hello? The voice on the other end was familiar but different, softer, uncertain. Hey, buddy, his dad said. I saw you on the news. Ethan stayed silent. His dad sighed. I didn't know you were taking care of all those puppies. You looked so grown up in the pictures. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. Was that what it took for Dad to call, seeing him in a newspaper? The words tumbled out before he could stop them. You left, Ethan said, voice flat. A pause. I know. You said you'd still be there for me. You promised. I know, Ethan, his father said, his voice thick. And I messed up. I should have called sooner. I should have tried harder. Silence stretched between them. Ethan wasn't sure what to say. A few months ago, all he had wanted was for his dad to come back. Now, he didn't even know if he wanted to hear his voice. But before he could decide how he felt, Shadow stirred. The small husky puppy let out a soft whimper and wobbled to his feet. Ethan looked down just in time to see Shadow do something strange. The little puppy limped toward the phone, his tiny body still weak but determined. And then he let out a single small howl. It wasn't strong, it wasn't loud, but it was there. Ethan blinked in surprise. His mother, still watching from across the room, let out a soft gasp. From the phone, his dad laughed, a warm, surprised sound. Was that one of the puppies? Ethan swallowed, looking down at Shadow, who had now curled up against his side. Yeah, he said quietly. That's Shadow. There was another pause. Then his dad said something Ethan didn't expect. "Tell me about him." A bridge between them. Ethan hesitated. He could end the conversation right there. But then Shadow nudged his hand, his little body warm against Ethan's, and for some reason he didn't want to. So without really thinking about it, he started talking. "He's the quietest one," Ethan said, running a finger gently over Shadow's tiny head, smaller than the rest, but he watches everything like he understands more than he should. His dad hummed softly. "Sounds like you." Ethan frowned. "I'm not small." His dad chuckled. "No, but you've always been quiet and smart." Ethan bit his lip. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just kept talking. He told his dad about Max's energy, about how Bella kept stealing everyone's food, about how Snow was timid but always huddled close to her siblings. He told him about Luna, about Finn, about how much he missed Tiny. His father listened, really listened, and somehow, as the words spilled out, the anger inside Ethan didn't feel as sharp anymore. When they finally said goodbye, Ethan didn't feel happy, but he didn't feel as empty either. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. More than just a phone call. Later that night, after Ethan had tucked the puppies into their blankets, he sat at the kitchen table with his mother. She looked at him carefully. "How do you feel?" she asked. Ethan thought about it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm still mad at him." His mother nodded. "That's okay." Ethan hesitated. But he really listened. His mother smiled a little. "Yeah," he did. A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt lighter than before. Ethan glanced over at Shadow, who was curled up by the heater. "Do you think he knew?" His mum raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Shadow," Ethan said, shifting in his chair. "It was like he knew I needed to talk to Dad." His mother looked over at the small puppy, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe," she murmured. "Animals have a way of understanding things we don't." Ethan didn't know if that was true, but when Shadow stirred in his sleep, stretching out his tiny paws with a content sigh, Ethan felt something inside him soften. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone, and for now, that was enough. Meanwhile, Shadow has done something no one expected, but what does it mean? The apartment was dark, filled with the soft hum of the city outside. Snow piled up on the windowsills, the winter wind whistling faintly against the glass. Inside, the warmth from the heater cast a soft glow over the room, where the puppies lay curled together, their tiny bodies rising and falling in steady breaths. Ethan was asleep, his body buried under a thick comforter, exhaustion finally overtaking him after days of tending to the puppies. His mother was in her room, and for the first time in a long time, their home didn't feel quite as lonely. But something wasn't right. A faint scratching sound echoed through the silence. It started soft at first, barely noticeable. Then, scratch, scratch, thump. Ethan stirred. A muffled whimper followed by more frantic scratching, then barking. Ethan's eyes shot open, and it wasn't just any bark, it was Shadow's bark. The little puppy had been the quietest of them all, the one who never made a sound unless absolutely necessary. But now, Shadow was pounding against Ethan's bedroom door, his tiny paws slamming against the wood, his bark rising in frantic urgency. Something was wrong. Ethan stumbled out of bed, rubbing his bleary eyes as he shuffled toward the door. The moment he turned the knob, Shadow bolted past him, his small body a blur of movement as he raced toward the hallway. And then, Ethan smelled it. Smoke. A fire in the dark. His heart slammed against his chest as his brain snapped awake. Smoke. There was smoke. He ran after Shadow, his bare feet skidding against the wooden floor as he turned the corner into the kitchen, and froze. Thick, curling smoke billowed from the stove. A dish towel, left too close to the heater, had caught fire. The flames flickered, crawling up the side of the counter, embers spitting out onto the floor. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, his body locking up in sheer panic. Then, "Mom!" he screamed. His mother's door flew open within seconds. She ran into the kitchen, her face draining of color the moment she saw the fire. Without hesitation, she grabbed a towel, soaking it under the sink, before throwing it over the flames. Ethan scrambled for the fire extinguisher under the counter, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the latch. "Here!" he gasped, shoving it into his mother's hands. She yanked off the safety pin, aimed, and sprayed. The hiss of the extinguisher filled the room, white foam coating the flames, suffocating them. Seconds felt like eternities, and then the fire died out. The kitchen fell into an eerie silence, the only sound their ragged breathing and the faint whine of a small puppy. Ethan turned, and there was Shadow, his tiny body still trembling, his ears pressed flat against his head. Shadow had saved them. A moment that changed everything. Ethan's mother dropped the fire extinguisher, running a shaking hand through her hair. Smoke still lingered in the air, a reminder of how close they had come to something far worse. She turned, her eyes landing on Shadow, who had shrunk back slightly, uncertain if he had done something wrong. Ethan immediately knelt down, scooping the tiny puppy into his arms. "You knew," he whispered, holding Shadow close. "You knew before we did." His mother exhaled, crouching beside him, gently stroking Shadow's head. "He woke you up?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "He wouldn't stop barking." His mother stared at the puppy for a long moment, her fingers gently scratching behind Shadow's ear. "He's a hero," she murmured. Shadow let out a small, tired sigh, nestling deeper into Ethan's arms, and for the first time in his life, Ethan believed in miracles. The call at the right time. Just as they were about to clean up the mess, Ethan's mother's phone buzzed loudly from the kitchen counter. She frowned, reaching for it, and froze when she saw the name on the screen. "Dad." Ethan stiffened. His mother glanced at him before answering. "Hello?" Ethan couldn't hear what his father said, but whatever it was made his mother pause. Then she sighed. "No, we're okay. But something happened tonight." Ethan watched as her fingers curled around the phone, her grip tight. "Shadow saved us," she said quietly. A beat of silence. Then, "Yeah," she continued, her voice softer now. "I think you should talk to Ethan." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. A second later, his mother held out the phone. Ethan hesitated, staring at the device in her hands, and then, slowly, he took it. "Hey," he said cautiously. "Hey, buddy," his dad said, his voice warm but careful. "Your mom just told me what happened. Are you okay?" Ethan exhaled shakily, looking down at Shadow, still curled in his arms. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." A pause. "I don't think I've ever heard of a puppy saving someone from a fire before," his dad said, a small chuckle in his voice. "That's pretty incredible." Ethan looked at Shadow, stroking his soft fur. "Yeah," he murmured, "he is." His dad's voice softened. "You know, Ethan, I meant what I said the other day. I miss you. I know I can't change what happened, but I want to try to do better." Ethan swallowed. He still wasn't sure if he was ready to forgive, but tonight had changed something. He didn't feel like a kid who had been left behind anymore, because Shadow hadn't let that happen. For the first time in months, Ethan wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, he could let his dad back in. The days after the fire felt different. There was an unspoken shift in the air, between Ethan and his mother, between Ethan and his father, between all of them. The fear of what could have happened still lingered, but so did something else, a realization. They had almost lost everything that night, and maybe, just maybe, that meant it was time to start fixing what was still left. A return to Chicago. One afternoon, just a few days after the fire, Ethan's mother was standing by the window when her phone buzzed. Ethan was on the floor playing with the puppies, but he looked up when he heard her say, "You're really coming back." Ethan froze. He sat completely still as his mother turned, phone pressed to her ear, her expression somewhere between surprise and cautious hope. "Okay," she murmured. I think that would be good. She ended the call and met Ethan's eyes. Your dad is coming back, she said. He wants to see you. Ethan's stomach twisted. His dad hadn't been here since the divorce. He had called, sure, but this was different. Why now? Ethan asked quietly. His mother sighed, stepping closer. Because I think he finally understands what he's been missing. Ethan bit his lip, looking down at Shadow, who was curled up against his lap. He wanted to believe that. He really did. But part of him still wondered, was it too late? An awkward yet needed reunion. 3 days later, Ethan stood by the apartment door, staring at the handle. On the other side, his father was waiting. His mother had stepped back, giving them space, even though Ethan could tell she was watching closely. Ethan wasn't sure why his hands felt clammy. He wasn't sure why his heart was beating too fast. Maybe because part of him was still mad. Maybe because part of him still wanted to yell, "Why did it take this long?" But before he could figure out what to do, the door opened. And there he was. His father looked different, tired, older, the same but not the same, and the moment he saw Ethan, his face softened. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice gentle. Ethan didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching, waiting. Then his dad's eyes drifted downward, to Shadow. The little puppy stood by Ethan's feet, looking up at his father with the same quiet curiosity that Ethan used to have as a kid. His father gave a small, cautious smile. "Is this the one?" he asked. "The one who saved you?" Ethan hesitated, then finally nodded. "Yeah." His dad crouched down, extending a hand carefully, waiting to see if Shadow would come to him. For a second, Shadow just stared. Then, after what felt like forever, he took a slow step forward, sniffed his hand, and gave a single, hesitant lick. Ethan's dad let out a soft chuckle. "Guess I got his approval." Ethan didn't smile back, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, he felt the tiniest bit lighter. Not back together, but moving forward. Ethan had secretly wondered if his parents seeing each other again would feel weird, and it did, but not in the way he expected. They didn't argue. They didn't ignore each other. Instead, they talked, like friends. It was awkward at first, but then, slowly, it became easier. His dad didn't ask to move back in. His mom didn't ask him to stay. But they agreed on one thing. Ethan came first. They talked about school, about what Ethan needed, about making time for both of them to be in his life, even if they weren't together anymore. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time, Ethan saw that maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe families weren't about being whole. Maybe they were about being present. And right now, both of his parents were here. That had to count for something. Finding homes, saying goodbyes. A few more weeks passed, and the puppies grew stronger. Ethan had known this part was coming. They couldn't keep them all. His mother had worked with local rescue groups, and through their viral story, families had stepped forward. Good families, people who had been touched by their journey and wanted to give the puppies loving homes. One by one, they started to leave. Luna and Snow went to a quiet couple who had recently lost their senior dog and wanted to give new life a chance. Max and Bella went together to a big family with 3 kids, a backyard, and endless energy to match their playful spirits. Rocky found a home with a young woman who worked with search and rescue dogs. She told Ethan she had a feeling he would be something special one day. Finn, the timid one, found comfort in a home with an older man who had lost his wife. "I think we'll keep each other company," he had said softly. Ethan was happy for them, really. But as the apartment became quieter, emptier, he couldn't help but feel like something was slipping away. Something important, his mother must have noticed, because one night, when they were sitting on the couch, just Ethan and Shadow, she looked over at him and asked, "Do you want to keep him?" Ethan's arms tightened around Shadow instinctively. "Yes," he admitted. His mother smiled softly. "Then he stays." Ethan looked down at Shadow, who was resting his head against his arm. Shadow had always been different from the others, quieter, more observant, like he had been waiting for something. And now Ethan knew. Shadow had been waiting for him. Not perfect, but enough. That night, Ethan lay in bed, Shadow curled up beside him. His dad had visited again earlier that evening. Not for long, just enough to check in. His mom had actually laughed at something he said. It wasn't the same as before, it never would be. But Ethan realized something. It didn't need to be. He had his mom, he had his dad, and now he had Shadow, the puppy who had saved him in more ways than one. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like something was missing. For the first time in a long time, he felt home. A year had passed since that cold winter night when Ethan found the puppies in the alley. A lot had changed. The apartment no longer felt empty. His mother had started volunteering at a local rescue center, and Ethan often went with her, helping to care for abandoned dogs. His dad visited often too, not just for him, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. And Shadow? Shadow was no longer the fragile, quiet puppy who had trembled in Ethan's arms. He had grown strong, his silver-grey fur thick and healthy, his once small body now full of life. But in his eyes, he still had that same quiet wisdom, that same understanding that had drawn Ethan to him from the start. Ethan had never believed in miracles before, but Shadow was a miracle, and so was Maggie's story. A celebration of second chances. That evening, a soft autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Ethan, his mum, and his dad walked side by side toward the rescue center. A small crowd had already gathered, people from their community, volunteers, families who had adopted the puppies, and in the center of it all, a photo. The photo that had changed everything. The same picture Ethan's mother had taken a year ago, 7 tiny puppies huddled together in the snow, their frail bodies trembling, their eyes filled with uncertainty. Ethan felt his chest tighten as he looked at it. That moment had been the beginning of everything. And now, he stood here with his family. His parents weren't back together, but they were a team. They had learned how to be there for him, to be there for each other in a way that wasn't perfect, but was enough. The past year had taught Ethan something important. Not every family starts off whole, but that doesn't mean you can't build something beautiful. The lives they saved. As the event started, Ethan was surprised to see familiar faces in the crowd, the people who had adopted his puppies. Luna's new owners waved, holding her in their arms, her white fur glowing under the evening lights. Max and Bella's families stood nearby, laughing as the 2 dogs wrestled playfully in the grass. Rocky sat beside a woman in a search and rescue uniform, his ears perked up, his body strong and alert. She had told Ethan months ago that she saw potential in him, and now Rocky was officially in training to become a rescue dog. Finn sat patiently beside an older man, his timid nature still there but softened by the love he had found in his new home. Snow wagged her tail happily, her small frame nestled beside the couple who had taken her in. They had all found where they belonged, and so had Ethan. Maggie's story lives on. As the evening continued, Ethan's mother stepped forward to speak. She took a deep breath, glancing at him and his father before looking at the crowd. Exactly 1 year ago, my son and I found a mother dog and her litter abandoned in the freezing cold, she began. Maggie didn't survive, but her puppies did. And because of them, her voice caught for a moment, but she smiled. We found something too. Ethan's father took a small step forward. We found out that sometimes second chances come in the most unexpected ways, he said, his eyes landing on Ethan. I never realized how much I was missing until I saw my son's face in that news story. That night I almost lost him, and I knew I had to do better. Ethan shifted uncomfortably as people turned to look at him, but then Shadow nudged his hand. He let out a breath, smiled a little, and said, I think Maggie saved more than just her puppies that night. His mom wrapped an arm around his shoulder, and for once, Ethan let her. A picture that changed everything. As the event wound down, Ethan found himself standing alone, looking at the framed photo. His dad came up beside him, hands in his pockets. "You know," his father murmured, "when I saw this picture for the first time, I realized I had missed so much." Ethan glanced at him. "Yeah." His dad gave a small nod, and I promised myself I wouldn't miss anything else. A year ago, Ethan wouldn't have believed him. Now, he did, because his dad had stayed, and so had Shadow, the puppy who had been the weakest, the one who had barely survived, the one who had saved them all. Ethan reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "Guess we all got a second chance, huh?" he whispered. Shadow let out a soft woof, his tail wagging. Ethan smiled. Not every beginning is perfect. But if Maggie had taught them anything, it was that anyone can create a better ending. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. Final message. Even the smallest act of kindness can change a life or mend a broken family. Ethan didn't just save a litter of helpless puppies, he sparked a miracle that brought his family back together. A single photo, a fleeting moment, a heart willing to care. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.
Imagine a fierce Rottweiler, scarred and starving, locked in a life-or-death battle with a pack of coyotes. But he's not fighting for himself. He's fighting for a helpless baby cradled in his shadow. How did they end up here? What drove this abandoned dog to protect a child at all costs? Stay tuned as this gripping journey of loyalty and redemption unfolds. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this. Bruno, a large Rottweiler, staggered through the dry, cracked earth. His paws kicked up faint clouds of dust as his ribs pressed visibly against his sleek black and tan coat. Hunger gnawed relentlessly at his insides, but it was a sensation he'd grown accustomed to during his long weeks of wandering. His once powerful frame, shaped by years of fighting in underground rings, had grown weaker. Yet his instincts, the only thing keeping him alive, drove him forward. The air was heavy with heat and the barren landscape stretched endlessly around him. A faint scent drifted into his nostrils, something unfamiliar and faintly sweet. His ears perked up and his head tilted slightly. His sharp instincts told him it was alive. The scent offered a faint hope, a pull stronger than the hunger clawing at his belly. He turned toward the source, his nose low to the ground. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he pressed on, navigating through sparse bushes and brittle grass. In the distance, the call of a coyote echoed faintly, a reminder that danger was never far away. The faint cries reached Bruno before his eyes found the source. His sharp ears twitched and he froze, sniffing the air carefully. Beneath the dry grass and faint scent of earth was something warmer, more fragile. He prowled forward cautiously, his massive frame almost silent as he moved. There, lying in a heap of frayed blankets, was a baby. Its face was pale, its cries thin and pitiful as it wiggled weakly in the heat. Bruno tilted his head, his amber eyes narrowing. This was not prey. This was something entirely different. A memory flashed in his mind. The sharp voice of his former owner yelling commands, the cruel shove that had left him to fend for himself. Bruno stepped closer, sniffing the baby cautiously. Its scent was strange, unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. The baby whimpered and stretched one tiny hand toward him. Bruno flinched but did not back away. Something deep and primal stirred within him, an urge stronger than hunger. He crouched low, his breath warm against the baby's fragile form, and let out a soft whine. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Bruno stood protectively over the baby, scanning the barren horizon. He could hear the distant rustle of leaves and the faint hum of insects. The baby's cries had softened, but its breathing was shallow. Bruno nudged the blanket with his nose, his powerful jaws gently gripping one corner. He lifted the baby carefully, cradling it in the loose fabric. It was awkward. He had never carried something so delicate before, but his instincts told him this was the only way to protect it. He began to move, his gait slow and deliberate. Every step was a challenge. His body was weak, his muscles screamed for rest, but he pushed forward. Each time the baby whimpered, Bruno paused to nudge it softly, as if to reassure it. The distant howl of a coyote reached his ears, sending a shiver through his tired frame. He picked up his pace, his claws digging into the dry ground as he searched for shelter. The light was fading fast, and the air grew cooler as night approached. Bruno's sharp instincts picked up on a new sound, something low and guttural. He paused, his ears swiveling. There, in the distance, were two yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. A coyote stepped out from the shadows, its body low to the ground, its teeth bared in a menacing snarl. Bruno's growl rumbled deep in his chest. He gently set the baby down, positioning himself between the child and the approaching predator. The coyote was not alone. Two more emerged from the underbrush, their eyes fixed on Bruno. He stood his ground, his tail stiff, his powerful body low, and braced for attack. The baby whimpered behind him, and Bruno's growl deepened. One of the coyotes lunged, but Bruno was faster. He leapt forward, his jaws snapping shut around the predator's shoulder. The coyote yelped and retreated, but another darted forward, aiming for Bruno's hind leg. Bruno twisted, his teeth flashing as he landed a blow. The third coyote hesitated, its gaze locked with Bruno's. For a moment, the pack seemed to reconsider. Bruno's fierce, unyielding stance was enough to send them retreating into the shadows. But Bruno didn't relax until the last yellow eye disappeared into the darkness. Bruno turned back to the baby, his body aching from the fight. Blood matted the fur on his shoulder, but he ignored the pain. The baby's cries were softer now, as if sensing that the danger had passed. Bruno nudged it gently with his nose, checking to make sure it was unharmed. He scanned the horizon and spotted a cluster of rocks forming a small overhang. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from the wind. He carefully lifted the baby again and made his way toward the makeshift shelter. Inside the overhang, Bruno curled his body around the baby, shielding it from the chill. His breathing was labored, his body trembling from exhaustion, but he refused to rest. The baby stirred, its tiny hand brushing against Bruno's fur. For the first time in weeks, Bruno felt a faint warmth, not from the child's touch, but from a deeper sense of purpose. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Bruno finally allowed himself to close his eyes. His body relaxed, though his senses remained alert. Tonight, he would protect this fragile life with everything he had left. The soft cries of the baby became fainter as Bruno trudged through the wilderness. Every step was labored, and his paws left faint imprints in the dry, dusty ground. He had adjusted his grip on the blanket, holding it carefully between his jaws to avoid hurting the tiny child. The baby's weight, though small, felt like a heavy burden on his weakening frame. The air was cool now that the sun had set, but Bruno's body was still warm from the exertion. His amber eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of water or shelter, but the barren expanse offered little promise. In the distance he could hear faint rustling, perhaps the sound of prey or potential predators. His ears twitched, his instincts sharpening, but he kept moving. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a soft whimper. Bruno stopped and gently placed the child down, nudging it with his nose as if to offer reassurance. The baby's tiny hand brushed against his fur, and something inside him softened. He let out a low whine, a sound that felt foreign to his battle-hardened self. The terrain grew rougher as the night deepened. Bruno climbed a steep incline, his claws digging into loose dirt and gravel. His muscles burned and his body begged for rest, but the baby's soft breathing urged him forward. Above, the stars glittered against the dark sky, offering a faint light to guide him. The wind picked up, howling through the sparse trees and sending chills down Bruno's spine. He paused briefly to adjust the blanket, ensuring the baby was shielded from the biting cold. As he continued, a distant howl echoed across the landscape. Bruno froze, his ears perking up. The sound was unmistakable. Coyotes. He let out a low growl, his body tensing as his protective instincts kicked in. He quickened his pace, his focus now entirely on finding a safe place for the night. After what felt like hours, Bruno's nose caught the faint scent of water. His tongue was dry, his throat parched, but he kept his focus on the child. The scent led him to a narrow stream winding through a cluster of trees. Bruno gently placed the baby on a patch of soft grass near the water's edge. He lowered his head to drink, the cold water soothing his parched throat and giving him a small surge of energy. Once he had drunk his fill, he nudged some water toward the baby, wetting its lips with his nose. The child stirred slightly, letting out a faint cry. Bruno's ears perked up, his eyes scanning the surrounding trees for any sign of movement. The forest felt too quiet, and his instincts warned him to stay alert. He picked up the baby again, now moving with renewed urgency. The path ahead was blocked by a steep hill, its surface slick with dew. Bruno hesitated, glancing at the incline and then at the baby in his jaws. He adjusted his grip on the blanket and began the climb, his claws digging into the slippery earth. Each step was a struggle. His legs trembled under the strain and his body screamed for rest. Midway up the hill, his paw slipped and he nearly lost his balance. The baby let out a soft cry and Bruno growled in frustration, steadying himself with a determined shake of his head. Step by step he pressed on, his breath coming in heavy pants. When he finally reached the top, he paused to catch his breath, glancing down at the sleeping child. The baby was safe, and that was all that mattered. As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, Bruno spotted a cluster of trees ahead, their thick canopies offering the promise of shelter. He approached cautiously, his ears swiveling at every sound. Beneath the largest tree was a hollowed-out space, surrounded by soft moss and leaves. Bruno carefully placed the baby inside, curling his body around it to shield it from the morning chill. The baby stirred, its tiny fingers brushing against his fur. Bruno rested his head on his paws, his body finally relaxing. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to close his eyes. The world around him faded into silence, but his instincts remained sharp. Even in rest, he was ready to protect the fragile life he had chosen to carry. Bruno lay curled under the large tree, his body shielding the baby from the chilly morning air. The forest around them was quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax. The baby stirred against his fur, letting out a faint whimper. Bruno gently nudged it with his nose, his amber eyes softening. The child's warmth against his side stirred something long buried within him, a memory from a time before the fights, before the cruelty. Bruno's eyelids drooped, and as exhaustion took hold, his mind drifted back to the past. The image of a weathered old man with kind eyes and rough hands filled his thoughts. Years ago, Bruno was not a fighter. He was a companion to a nomadic man, an old wanderer who roamed the countryside with nothing but his horse, a small cart, and a tent. The man, dressed in faded clothes patched with care, had found Bruno as a puppy, abandoned in a ditch. "You're a tough little fella, aren't you?" the man had said, lifting the trembling pup in his arms. His voice was warm, his touch gentle. Bruno remembered the man's face, the deep lines carved by years of hardship, his white beard that bristled when he laughed, and his eyes, always full of quiet wisdom. The old man named him Bruno, and together they traveled through vast landscapes. Days were spent exploring rolling hills and dense forests, while nights were filled with the crackling of a campfire and the man's soft humming. Bruno had learned to trust humans because of this man. The old man treated Bruno not as a pet but as a partner. He shared his food, no matter how little he had, and spoke to Bruno as though the dog could understand every word. "It's just you and me, boy," he would say, scratching behind Bruno's ears. "We've got the whole world to ourselves." Bruno had grown strong under the man's care, his body maturing into a powerful protector. He had chased away wolves that threatened their camp and guarded the man's belongings when he went into town to trade goods, and one night as they sat by the fire, the man had placed a hand on Bruno's head and said, "If anything ever happens to me, you've got to promise me you'll keep going, boy. You're a survivor." Bruno had nuzzled against the man's hand, not understanding the words but feeling the love behind them. But one fateful day the old man didn't wake up. Bruno had nudged him with his nose, whimpering softly, but the man's body remained still. The warmth that had always radiated from him was gone, replaced by the cold stillness of death. Bruno stayed by his side for days, refusing to leave. He barked at strangers who passed by, trying to get someone's attention, but no one stopped. Eventually, hunger and instinct forced him to move on. The loss had shattered Bruno. The world, once so full of love and safety, became harsh and unkind. Without the old man, Bruno was vulnerable. He wandered aimlessly, searching for the warmth he had once known but finding only cruelty and hardship. Bruno awoke to the baby stirring beside him, its tiny fingers clutching his fur. The memory of the old man lingered in his mind, filling him with a bittersweet ache. The baby's warmth and helplessness reminded him of the bond he once shared with the man who had saved him. For the first time in years, Bruno felt a spark of purpose. Protecting the baby wasn't just a matter of instinct. It was a way to honor the memory of the old man who had taught him love and loyalty. Bruno stood, his muscles stiff but his resolve stronger than ever. He gently picked up the baby, cradling it in the blanket as he prepared to move on. The world was still harsh and unkind, but this fragile life in his care gave him a reason to keep going. The first rays of dawn filtered through the dense canopy, painting golden streaks across the forest floor. Bruno stirred beneath the tree where he had sheltered the baby through the night. His body ached from the long journey and the lingering pain of his earlier battle with the coyotes. Despite his exhaustion, his ears twitched at the faint sound of footsteps approaching through the underbrush. His instincts sharpened as his head shot up, and he scanned the area with alert, amber eyes. The sound grew closer, a deliberate human cadence. The scent followed, faint but unmistakably human. A figure emerged from the forest shadows. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in hiking clothes, her face marked with weariness but also determination. She froze mid-step when her gaze fell on Bruno. Her wide, startled eyes flicked between the scarred Rottweiler and the bundle of blankets at his feet. Bruno growled low in his throat, stepping protectively in front of the baby. His scarred body and battle-worn frame made for a fearsome sight, and his warning rumble echoed through the quiet clearing. But the woman, though cautious, didn't flee. "Hey there," she said softly, her hands raising slowly to show she meant no harm. Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried an undeniable tone of kindness. "I'm not here to hurt you." Bruno's growl softened, but he didn't relax. His stance remained tense, his gaze unwavering. The woman crouched down slowly, lowering herself to his eye level. "It's okay," she murmured, her tone calm and steady. "You're just protecting the little one, aren't you?" The woman's eyes swept over the scene, the baby bundled tightly in frayed blankets, its face pale but peaceful, the massive dog, his body positioned as a living barrier between the child and any possible threat. She noticed the scars crisscrossing Bruno's body, the dried blood matting his fur, and the exhaustion etched into his every movement. This wasn't just any dog. This was a survivor. Reaching into her backpack, the woman pulled out a water bottle. She unscrewed the cap and poured a small amount into her cupped hand. "Here," she said gently, holding her hand out. "You look like you could use this." Bruno's nose twitched at the scent of fresh water. He hesitated, his instincts warring within him. His survival-hardened mind warned him to remain on guard, but there was something in the woman's voice, something warm, something familiar, that soothed the jagged edges of his distrust. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward and lapped at the water. The woman smiled faintly. "That's it. You're okay. You've done so well." Bruno pulled back, his gaze flicking between her and the baby. The woman spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "I'm just going to check on the baby, okay? I promise I won't hurt it." Bruno let out a soft whine, his body relaxing slightly. The woman edged closer, her movements deliberate and careful. She knelt beside the baby, her breath catching as she adjusted the blanket. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's alive." The baby stirred weakly, its tiny hand clenching the edge of the blanket. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she looked back at Bruno. "You've been protecting this baby all on your own, haven't you?" Bruno's only response was a steady, unwavering gaze. The woman wiped her eyes and reached for her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. "Hi, this is Emma," she said, her voice urgent but controlled. "I'm on the Ridgewood Trail near the East Clearing. I found a baby, and there's a dog. He's been protecting it. They both need help immediately." She ended the call and turned back to Bruno. "Help is on the way," she said gently. "You've done everything you could. It's time to let someone else help too." Bruno's ears twitched at the sound of a distant engine. His body stiffened as the noise grew louder, his instincts warning him of potential danger. Moments later, the rescue team arrived, a small ambulance and 2 paramedics stepping cautiously into the clearing. Their eyes widened at the sight of the massive Rottweiler standing over the baby. "Is he friendly?" one of the paramedics asked, keeping his distance. Emma raised her hand to calm them. "He's protective, but he's fine. Let me talk to him." She crouched beside Bruno, her voice soft but firm. "It's okay, boy. They're here to help. You've done your part." Bruno growled softly, his body tense, but Emma placed a hand gently on his head. "Trust me," she whispered. "You're safe now." The dog hesitated for a moment, his amber eyes scanning the faces of the strangers. Finally, he stepped aside, his movements deliberate and measured. The paramedics approached the baby cautiously, their hands steady as they lifted the fragile bundle from the ground. Bruno watched intently, his body poised to spring if anything went wrong. One of the paramedics knelt beside Bruno, holding out a soft blanket and a bowl of water. "He's been through a lot," the man said, his tone filled with respect. "Let's get him checked out, too." Emma smiled as Bruno lowered his head to drink from the bowl. The baby, now safely cradled in the paramedic's arms, let out a soft coo. Bruno's ears twitched, and his gaze followed the child as it was carried toward the ambulance. Emma knelt beside him once more, stroking his fur gently. "You're a hero," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved that baby's life." For the first time in what felt like forever, Bruno allowed himself to relax. The tension in his muscles melted away as he leaned into Emma's touch. The world no longer felt like a hostile, unforgiving place. In that moment, surrounded by kindness and care, Bruno felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The ambulance's engine hummed steadily as it pulled into the hospital lot. Bruno lay quietly on the blanket in the back, his body exhausted, yet his amber eyes never leaving the baby cradled in the nurse's arms. The paramedics whispered among themselves, marveling at the story they had just witnessed. "This dog," one said softly. "He's a hero. No doubt about it." Bruno's ears flicked at their voices, but he remained still. His focus remained on the baby, the fragile life he had protected so fiercely through the long and dangerous journey. Inside the hospital, chaos unfolded as a young couple rushed through the doors. The woman's face was pale, streaked with tears, while the man's hands clenched into tight fists. "We're here for the baby," the woman cried, her voice trembling. "The one they found in the forest? Please, where is he?" A nurse approached them, her expression calm but serious. "Your baby is safe," she reassured them, guiding them toward the pediatric ward. "He's being examined now, but there's something else. Someone else you should see." The couple exchanged puzzled glances but followed her into a nearby room. There, lying on a blanket in the corner, was Bruno. His scarred frame seemed out of place against the sterile white walls, his amber eyes glowing softly as he raised his head to meet their gaze. The woman froze. Her breath caught as her eyes locked on the dog's face. "It can't be," she whispered. The man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the faint, jagged scar on Bruno's left ear, a unique mark shaped like a lightning bolt. "It's him," the man muttered, his voice breaking. "It's the dog." Years ago, the couple had owned Bella, a gentle Rottweiler who had been their loyal companion. When Bella gave birth to a litter of puppies, their lives took a chaotic turn. Struggling with financial hardships and the pressures of raising a family, they viewed the puppies as a burden. One fateful night, overwhelmed and desperate, they made a cruel decision. They placed the litter in a large cardboard box and left it near a dumpster behind an empty lot. Bella's pleading eyes haunted them as they drove away, but guilt was buried under the weight of their circumstances. What they didn't know was that a homeless man had been living nearby, taking shelter under a makeshift tarp. When he heard the faint whimpers from the box, he approached and found the frightened, shivering puppies inside. His weathered hands trembled as he picked up the smallest of them, a tiny pup with a jagged mark on his left ear. "This one's a fighter," the old man had murmured, tucking the puppy into his coat. He named the pup Bruno and took him everywhere, sharing what little he had. The couple had moved on with their lives, pushing the memory of that night into the recesses of their minds. Now, standing before the scarred, battle-worn dog who had saved their child, the weight of their actions came crashing down. Emma, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "This dog," she said firmly, "carried your baby through the wilderness. He fought off predators and protected him when no one else could. Whatever happened in the past, he deserves your gratitude now." The woman knelt slowly, her eyes filling with tears as she reached out a trembling hand. "You've been through so much," she whispered. "I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. We did something terrible. We left you. We didn't even give you a chance." Her voice broke, and she glanced at her husband, who knelt beside her. "We thought it was the only way," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "We couldn't take care of the puppies, and we didn't know what else to do. But it was wrong. We were wrong." Bruno's ears flicked at their words. The recognition in their voices, the scent of their presence, it stirred faint memories of his earliest days. He remembered the warmth of his mother, the comfort of her fur, and the scent of humans who had once been near. The pain of abandonment came rushing back, mingling with the love he had known from the old man who had saved him. The woman moved closer, her hand hovering near Bruno's head. "You didn't have to do what you did," she said softly. "But you did. You saved my baby. Thank you." Bruno's amber eyes flicked between her and the man. His body tensed as their words echoed in the room, but slowly the tension ebbed. He lowered his head slightly, allowing her hand to gently stroke his fur. In the days that followed, Bruno and the baby recovered side by side. The couple visited them often, bringing treats for Bruno and speaking softly to him about Bella and the puppies they had left behind. Their remorse was evident in every word, their gratitude overflowing as they recounted how Bruno had saved their child. One quiet afternoon, the couple sat with Bruno in the hospital courtyard. The woman cradled the baby in her arms, while the man knelt beside Bruno, stroking his fur. "You deserve better," the man said softly, his voice filled with conviction. "We owe you more than we can ever repay. Let us make it right." The woman nodded, her eyes misting. "We can't undo what we did," she said, "but we can give you a home, a real home. You're part of our family now, and you always will be." Bruno looked up at them, his amber eyes reflecting the quiet understanding that had grown in his heart. Slowly, his tail wagged, a faint but undeniable sign of trust. The scar on his ear, a mark of his past, was now a symbol of survival, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond he had forged through the trials of his life. Bruno had come full circle, and for the first time he felt not just safe, but truly loved.